Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Management Collaborative Meeting. We've been very thankful for all of the industry and education partners who have engaged with us since we started the New Jersey Pathways to Career Opportunities Initiative back in December. We've had an incredible response. And we know that this approach, this pathway work together statewide is the way to go to ensure that we have the best skilled, well-trained workforce to move our economy forward and to ensure economic mobility for all of our residents. I just want to welcome you on behalf of the New Jersey Council of County Colleges and the New Jersey Community College Consortium for Workforce and Economic Development. My name is Catherine Stargell. I am the Senior Director of Strategy and Partnerships. I am leading the New Jersey Pathways to Career Opportunities Initiative with an amazing team of directors and program managers. And none of this would be possible, of course, if it were not for our amazing partnership with the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. We collectively went to the legislature and the governor's office and advocated for this work statewide. And it really was because of the immense influence and representation of NJBIA that we think pushed our advocacy over the edge to convince the governor's office and the legislature that this was worthwhile. There were industry partners behind it, education partners behind it. And so I want to introduce Michelle Securka to give some opening remarks, please.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Such a pleasure to join you this morning, and I apologize in advance. I can't stay for the full discussion, but I see my colleague Chrissy is on, and I believe Kyle is on as well. And Kyle and Chris and Chrissy really have been leading at the what I call boots on the ground here, working tirelessly with our businesses, bringing them to the table so that we can create these partnerships along with academia in order to ensure the future workforce state of New Jersey. This is critically important work now more than ever. You know, pre-COVID, we had challenges in workforce development, but COVID only exacerbated that. And we are thrilled that we were able to convince our policymakers to actually put some money behind this initiative because we know it takes resources to get there. But while money is one thing, your time is the most critical. And so with that, I want to get right on to it, but I want you to know the business community is here. We heard great input from the business community through all sectors last week. And now we want to marry that up. We know what the needs are. Let's get together and let's start creating that future workforce. Thank you again so much for your cooperation and participation. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Michelle. So appreciate our partnership. So we have a stacked agenda today. I'm going to share that with you. The theme for today's collaborative meeting, of course, is industry value credentials and stackable pathways. And we're very fortunate to get two national experts in this line of work and in this area to join us today and really talk about what they have seen nationally with regards to industry valued credentials and stackable pathways, and to give us here in New Jersey insight as to how we might go about this work to ensure, in fact, our students and working adults have all the skills and credentials they need to move forward in their careers and certainly to move forth our economy because they are the crux of our workforce. First, we have Michelle Van Noy, who is the director and associate professor at Rutgers. She runs or is in charge of the Center for Education and Employment at Rutgers. And Michelle has a lot of experience, in particular with research and a study of community colleges and the results for those students and how community colleges might, in fact, improve curriculum and offerings. We were so excited when Aaron said, "Oh, I know Michelle." I actually initially went to him like, "Oh, can we get this woman? She's in New Jersey." He was like, "Yes, I know her." So we're so happy that Aaron had that connection and Michelle was willing to join us today. So thank you, Michelle. Also with us today is John Dyer, who is the Associate Vice President of Workforce Development for the American Association of Community Colleges. So John, like Michelle, gets to see has a bird eye view of what's going on nationally. That's very informative for us here in New Jersey, because if we don't have to recreate the wheel, if in fact we can learn from John the best practices across the nation, that's what we want to do. So I want to thank both of you for being here today. So I would like to start with you, Michelle, ladies first. If you could please, John is smiling, I like that, a chivalrous man. I would like for you to spend, 4 or 5 minutes or so talking about this area of focus and your expertise, what you have seen with regards to industry value credentials and stackable pathways.
Happy to do so. And thank you so much for the invitation to be with you all today. I'm always excited to get to talk to a New Jersey audience and share our work and inform some of the exciting work that you're doing here. This is really a great initiative. I'm looking forward to learning from you all, and I'm always happy to share our work. So, I can share a little bit about, some of the work that we've done. As Catherine mentioned, we've done a lot of work, with community colleges over the years and looking at the connections to the workforce, and, particularly looking at sort of more short-term training in terms of non-credit, and also looking at non-degree credentials. So I can share just some thoughts on that. We've spent time over the past year doing a national scan of what community colleges are doing in their non-credit workforce programs. So I can share a few insights about some of the high-level trends, and then I can point you to our website. We do have an issue brief that summarizes our findings, but we see a lot of interest nationally in the kind of work that's happening here in New Jersey about kind of thinking about developing links and pathways across these kinds of programs into degree programs. And I think we see a lot of interest and a great degree of variability in progress. So I think across the nation, this is very much a work in progress. So New Jersey is right there with everybody else in trying to figure out these issues, but it's a priority. I would say it's certainly a national priority. A challenge that we see in a lot of non-credit programs, there's not a lot of supports for students, and there's a sort of a big reported need. We know that we're talking about adult populations, students with a lot of need, who want to get back to work quickly and get skills to advance. But we are talking often about an older, more disadvantaged population, many that don't have high school diplomas, and so these are looking to get a college degree. And so these pathways to further programs are really important. We see shifts in organizational structures too. Colleges are really trying to experiment with different ways of organizing credit and non-credit, whether it be merging credit programs with non-credit or very separate programs that are really rebranding kind of the and unique qualities of workforce training and credentials. But I think one of the big questions that's really at stake here is about quality. And I know that that's a big point of discussion, is how do we know if these credentials are of value? And we asked the colleges we spoke with, and we're doing more research on that as we go forward. But what we heard at a high level universally is that documenting labor market need is essential. That's a key driver here. And we're doing some more research on that. We have a survey on labor market information and how colleges are using it. But that's a big driver the colleges are talking about in terms of why these programs might be considered quality. There's other strategies in terms of that kind of go back to the outreach to credit programs, involving credit faculty as it's possible and engaging their thoughts in the work. And then also thinking about external standards and aligning with industry certifications and really looking towards those external standards and endorsements. And so those are some of the things we heard. I want to share, I have just one quick slide I want to put up because it's a visual, I think, that will help us see a little bit about what I'm talking about with quality. A couple of years ago, our center put out an issue brief that looks at kind of this question of non-degree credential quality and just maps out at a very high level how we might think about it. So clearly there's a lot of different conceptions and definitions in the field right now about what we think about quality, but in some ways I'm trying to help make sense of all of that to break it down into a few big areas. We think about credentials and programs even as having a design element. How is the program actually set up? What is the content of the credential? And that's what we call design. So quality design, right? Is the content relevant? Is it aligned with the labor market? Are the instructional processes appropriate and relevant and helpful? How is assessment done? Are they stackable, transparent, accessible? All these questions that kind of go into how we think about setting up programs and credentials. They can all be really high quality. And then the question is, do they lead to an outcome of value? Right. So that's, of course, I think what we're very concerned about is, do these lead to good outcomes for students? Do they get well-paying jobs with opportunities for advancement, pathways for further education? Do they have the basic skills that the credential is claiming that they will have? But those are sort of separate issues. One is like, do you have a well-designed credential? And then the other is, does it lead to an outcome of value? Separate but interrelated concepts. But the reason why I think it's important to think about them differently is if we want to intervene in each of them, there's different things we do. We want to think about how we design the credentials. We do, colleges need to think about that. And then when we think about the outcomes of value, one of the observations that we have is that there's a set of processes that translate a quality credential to an outcome of value. So it's not that, you create the best credential in the world and all of a sudden it's going to lead to great outcomes. There's a process there that makes it be known, that takes a good credential, that shares information with the world through transparency initiatives, that creates awareness and trust with employers and others who might use it, that validates it with external partners. So I think that's one of the things, again, to point out is that the credential value is something that's created. It's something that there needs to be an action there to get to sort of those outcomes of value that we care about. So those are just some high-level thoughts that may be helpful in approaching kind of this question of non-degree credential quality and just quality in general. So I'll stop there because I could go on, but I know we want to get to our discussion, and I'll let John share his thoughts.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. John, if you could talk about some of your insight with regards to industry value credentials and stackable pathways, maybe some specific actionable items for all of us in New Jersey, who are striving to build these industry-driven pathways we should generally be thinking about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be on with you. My smile was because I was having to follow Michelle, which is always a heady task. This is a topic that AACC has a lot of interest in. I led a project a couple of years ago called The Right Signals that had to do with one of Michelle's credentialing transparency. And I'd like to dig in a little bit on that, if I may, at the outset. Fundamentally, I think a credential should say something about what a credential holder knows and can do. I don't think that's a particularly controversial point to make. Traditional degrees or certificates, which we could argue are credentials, may or may not do this. A third-party credential is more likely to do so. And by that, when I say a third-party credential, that could be anything from a CDL license to a logistics certification, to a NIM certification in manufacturing, or any one of those. The one thing that I think is really critical that Michelle touched on is the transparency. A credential, what it represents in terms of what a credential holder knows it can do, should be clear to a number of constituencies, and they should be able to articulate it. I would start with the credential holder. She should be able to say, this is what I know and what I can do, and it should be reflected in that credential. Employers should understand, when someone arrives at my place of work with this credential, I already know, by virtue of that credential, what it is that they know and what it is that they can do. And institutions, community colleges, should be able to articulate that between and among themselves. Without that transparency and that clarity, you're left with a situation where it can be no one quite understands what that credential represents. I used to stop there and I would say it was 3 constituencies. I think I was wrong in saying that, and I would add to the constituencies that really need to have that level of transparency. I would add workforce investment boards and workforce intermediaries. I think they're absolutely critical in this piece as well. The example I give often in logistics or manufacturing is a CDLA. A CDLA means that somebody is licensed to drive a truck. Now, what it may not tell you is whether they have an endorsement for pulling a tank behind that truck filled with some liquid, whether it's petroleum or water or any number of things. They may or may not have a certification for hazardous materials as well. But either way, there's a general understanding of what that CDL represents. I will note, however, and this is true in a number of fields, if someone arrives at an employer with certain credentials, even though that credential is understood, it may still require some further investigation. For example, someone arrives at a logistics company with a freshly printed CDL license. I can almost guarantee, although I'm not an employer in logistics field, that that employer is going to invite the applicant to demonstrate their skills and probably put them with a more seasoned driver before they hand them a brand new truck and say, go out and conquer the world. Likewise, someone with a welding certificate and perhaps a multiple industry credentials like American Welding Society credential or American Society of Manufacturing Engineers credential is probably still going to be asked during the interview process to demonstrate their skills in person and in real time. Even so, those are relatively clear credentials. This morning, as a thought experiment, I went online and I looked up logistics certifications. I stopped when I got to 6 that were all offered by different organizations with different acronyms. And I thought, if I'm an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and I decide I want to get a logistics certification, I'm tearing my hair out when I see that there's 6 and I have no idea what they mean and what their value is. If I'm an employer and I'm faced with these 6 different things, how could I possibly know which one is better than another? It's a challenge. If I'm a faculty member, how do I know which certification to align with my curriculum? Maybe I could get it right. Maybe I won't. Maybe the certification is going to change and the one I'm offering is no longer relevant, while this other shiny one over here that I skipped is the better one. It's a real challenge. Let's not kid ourselves. So transparency is absolutely critical. The other point I would make is that from my point of view, and I think from the association's point of view, is that credentials should be viewed as a floor, not a ceiling, so that an institution can in good conscience say, someone holding this credential can do A, B, and C. Some people holding the credential, perhaps they were more ambitious students or have more experience, may also be able to do D and E. But if you view it as a floor, an employer has some confidence that the person they hire, no matter whether they graduated first in their class or last in their class, still has mastered all of the competencies and has all the knowledge necessary for which they're looking. So I'll stop there and look forward to the larger conversation.
Thank you, John. That certainly, your remarks so far have definitely given us something to think about, you and Michelle. I think I want to stick with you, John, if you don't mind not picking on you. You kind of hit on this with regards to transparency, right? And so, I know some of the community colleges have created certificates of achievement. They've, developed courses that group together skill sets that make a student qualified for certain occupations, right? And those are embedded in the degree programs. And so my question is, you know, can we define those as industry valued credentials? Because that happens, you know, a bit throughout our network of community colleges.
I'll give you the short answer and then the longer answer. The short answer is no, we can't. The longer answer is employers will decide what's of value and what is. Industry will decide that, and educational institutions and workforce intermediaries will respond accordingly. That's in the perfect world. Ideally, it's a transactional process throughout, and it's an industry-informed development of the certificate. So yes, it is industry valued from the get-go. But the short answer is, and I say this with the deepest love for my colleagues in community colleges, we don't get to decide what's industry valued. Industry does.
Thank you. That's something I've been struggling with, because our colleges are incredible institutions, you know, obviously training up the workforce in a way that, you know, one can argue more importantly than other education institutions. And so I understand, you know, the certificates of achievement, but that your comments were very interesting. Michelle, we are all committed to building stronger partnerships between high schools, community colleges, workforce development agencies. We're doing some work with community-based training providers and really bringing them in the fold, as well as four-year colleges and universities. How can a focus on industry value credentials enable these important partnerships? Like, how can they bring us all together?
Well, I think one of the interesting trends, I think, if we look at these programs in a bigger picture, there's a lot of competition out there in terms of workforce training. And one of the questions, I think, for community colleges at a bigger existential level is like, what's the value add of a community college versus another online training provider or other entities, for-profit groups or companies that are getting into this area? What does a community college bring that's of value? And it's those partnerships and pathways, because community colleges are the best positioned, I think, to sort of say, look, we can help you get this initial training and we can help bridge you to another program. So that's why these partnerships are so important. And that's, you know, where the kind of figuring out the credentials that can kind of be those hinges that make the partnerships work is what's so critical, I think, for community colleges, really acting on what is the competitive advantage, and the competitive advantage that is the thing that's going to be most helpful for students and make the most difference in terms of social mobility and really actualize what community colleges are here to do, which is help people get opportunities. So I don't know if that's too abstract, but I think that the idea is that these credentials are really, really important, and the partnerships are really important. This is what makes community colleges and these programs have so much potential.
I feel like you're a cheerleader for community colleges. I love that. But also, I think that means, right, that all of the other education institutions that do partner with community colleges, right, for purposes of whatever occupational industry value credentials, it just, you know, validates them and their work, and the whole connection makes us all stronger, right?
You're right. No, I probably emphasize the community college perspective more so than the others, because that's where a lot of my focus is. But I do think that, you know, in some ways it's actually kind of like taking the role of what the public sector can do and what the pathways are really about. I mean, that's the whole point, is to build those pathways for students. And that's really, you know, what educational institutions can do that is different and unique, and you know, thinking about how to go from high school onward and bringing together all the partners, so we don't have such a fragmented system, which is kind of what we have. So it's very important.
Absolutely. John, do you have some comments to talk about those partnerships and alignment?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll give you what I think is a relatively easy trick to help with some of that alignment at the secondary, post-secondary level. And that is because Perkins funding requires that there be advisory boards for career and technical education programs at both the secondary and post-secondary levels. Why not combine those two committees? You can make employers go to one less meeting and the same industry people are informing the same programs at secondary and post-secondary. And if you can't have a clear alignment that comes out of that, then you're doing something, I would argue, that's pretty fundamentally wrong. That's an easy lift. And it's an easy solution that I think puts that in place in a big hurry. Beyond that, I mean, I think alignment is a tricky thing. Alignment isn't something you do once. Alignment is an ongoing process, in my view, that takes all the parties to the table. That takes trust, that takes transparency, and that takes a recognition that not every party in the conversation is always going to be able to devote endless hours to that conversation over and over and over again. We do tend to, in higher ed, sometimes to navel gaze perhaps more than the private sector is willing to engage in. And so there's a challenge there to make sure if you're in an educational institution, to make sure that you're really sort of making sure that when you're asking an employer or someone from the private sector for their time to help do this work, that you're respectful of that time. But I think it's too important not to do it.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to think that that's what we're trying to do. Like, I love your comment about having one table for the employers to come to reach all the education partners. And that was kind of the thought behind this initiative. I think we have a long way to go, although last week, and Glenn Best, the director of manufacturing and supply chain management for this initiative, will talk about the industry leadership team meetings that we held last week. And we think that was the beginning. We have to make it easy on industry, right, to get involved. If we can turn our attention now to credit and non-credit integration, that would be amazing. How can community colleges take steps to embed industry value credentials into credit degree programs? And how can the community colleges help non-credit students transition to credit programs through prior learning assessments solutions? Michelle, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I think you hit on something important. Obviously, is developing those institutional processes. The prior learning assessment is really important, and I know that many colleges in New Jersey have been working in various ways to develop those processes and extend those to non-credit. And so I think recognizing that takes some time institutionally to do, but it's important to forge ahead with those discussions. And it's complicated when we think about bringing all the partners together in terms of thinking about the transferability of all of those credits over different institutions. But it's important to have those conversations and develop those processes within institutions. And I understand that that New Jersey has recently kind of committed to kind of taking a look at this at the statewide level in terms of PLA, which is very exciting because those coordinated efforts certainly will help with the institutional transferability. And that's really, really encouraging progress. But it is really fundamental. And I mean, I think so there's so many institutional challenges here. We haven't gotten yet to the part about communicating the opportunity to students. And that's something that everyone needs to be mindful of, as well as making sure students understand these opportunities. There's a lot of students who might benefit, who might not know. And so it's a big education effort in terms of getting everybody at the college to be aware of these opportunities so that they can convey that information to students, and then thinking about other outreach strategies to get that information out to students that could make a difference for. So.
Our ultimate consumer, right? Yeah. The students. Yeah. John, would you like to weigh in on the credit, non-credit integration?
Sure. Two quick points. To your first question about getting credentials into degree programs. In my dream world, no community college would offer any degree or certificate that wasn't also accompanied by a third-party industry certification. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to something like just a regular 2-year general studies transfer, where somebody's going on to complete their second year, their second 2-year program at Rutgers, for example. But for anything that's intended to go into a career or a technical education career, then I'd love to see that alignment with an industry recognized credential every time. And that, how do you do that? Well, the simplest way to do it would be for a college president or the legislature in New Jersey to say, "Thou shalt." Uh, is that actually going to happen? I suspect not, but it's not without the realm of possibility. The Florida legislature issued a series of "thou shalts" to the community colleges over the last few years that have resulted in some really interesting rules around transfer and around course numbering and things that while I think there's been some grumbling, have also been in the main of benefit to the students. Now, as far as credit and non-credit, I think actually a relatively simple solution is if faculty and departments and institutions begin to map their curriculum to specific competencies. Once they know what those competencies are and can say, this is what the student who completes this class knows and can do as demonstrated by whatever it is, now it's an easy thing to align that to a certificate. And now when someone walks in the door, for example, with an ASME certification for working on brakes on an automobile, it's a relatively easy thing for an instructor to look at and say, yep, you don't have to take the brakes class because you carry the certification, or whatever it is. So PLA is complex and complicated, but if you have the competencies mapped out, I think it gets a whole lot easier.
And I will say, somebody just put something in the chat on this, which it does build on, it ties into some work I've observed in the state over the years, that some of the work that Thomas Edison has done, and other entities that can review curriculum on a broader level and make determinations about equivalencies based on competencies, like John is saying. And to me, it seems like if there is an opportunity for statewide agreement about some of those kinds of assessments, and then sort of saying, okay, well, we're going to assess this, and we'll all agree that maybe these are our equivalencies, that would really help. I know that there were some efforts around that with some of the TACT grant work that happened, a few years ago. And to me, I think those are some good exemplars to go back to and sort of look to as a reference point as we think about new ways to go forward. And I'm sure there's a lot of new and interesting and exciting ideas, but there's a lot of good work to build on.
You're right. Thomas Edison certainly has been the leader in the state with regards to PLA solutions. The agreement that Michelle has been referencing is that just Monday evening at the last quarterly Council of County Colleges meeting, all the college presidents and trustees passed a resolution that collectively the 18 community colleges in New Jersey would work toward some consistent prior learning assessment solutions so that will be implemented so that all of our students can get credit for non-credit courses that they've taken throughout the state, as well as for work experience. So we know that that resolution is the beginning. There's a lot of work to be done, as Michelle has suggested and John have suggested, but that was a big step to saying this is something that is a focus and we're gonna work on it. So yeah. That was great. John, I love so much of what you've said, Michelle as well, but so much of what you said this week when you said in your dream world. I often say to my colleagues at the community colleges, as well as at the Council and Consortium, in my imagination, what I would like to see happen. Thank you very much for that example of Florida. And certainly we will look to other best practices. You're right, getting the policymakers involved sometimes is, challenging, but I would be very curious as to the outcomes from those policy decisions. I know we only have a few minutes, but I am curious about other effective strategies for creating stackable credential pathways that have been successful in other states and communities. Michelle, I'm going to lead off with you. I know John has probably a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the sector work that's happening here, I think is a really effective approach because, actually going back to your, one of your original questions about the industry engagement and, how do you know if a credential is, college, if you can have a college issued credential or, whatever, all these questions that we're thinking about, how do you know if it's industry valued? To me, it seems like where we see the most success is in places where you have business and industry at the table. So I think that's why this is a very promising approach, because that's where we've seen a lot of success in other places, is where it's sector based. And you have the industry buy-in. So you have, the credentials that are created are sort of, as I said, sort of have that sort of translation process that take them from being a good credential to being something that's valued and recognized. So, I think there's a lot of places we could point to, but I think the places where we see the most effective outcomes really do come from that industry engagement and being based in a sector. So I'll leave it at that and let John take on the rest.
I'll throw out one best practice and throw out one caveat. One of the really interesting best practices that we saw as some of our Lumina funded work around credentialing was a community college in Ohio that was working with what I would call tier 3 manufacturing shops, smaller job shops, 50 to 100 employees in many cases. And what they were able to do, because they realized there was really kind of a mismatch in credentialing and hiring between what the college was doing, what the employers were doing, they went into the manufacturing facilities, talked to the HR people about what they were looking for, and then more fundamentally, went onto the shop floor and talked to the people in charge and talked to some of the people doing the work and saying, what is it that you do every day? What do you need to be able to do every day? And with that, we're able to map out the competencies and actually eventually helped the HR department rewrite their job descriptions to better reflect what it is that was actually happening in the workplace on a day-to-day basis. Now, every college might not have the capacity to send their workforce staff out into every employer and help them rewrite their job descriptions. But that level of collaboration resulted in a much cleaner pathway with much more relevant credentialing and much happier employers with employees that stuck around and weren't bouncing in and out of the shops because they were well placed with the right skills to be effective. So that's one example, a little bit extreme, but incredibly effective. The caveat I will offer when we're talking about credentials and stackable credentials is that it has sometimes been easy in the United States that we've taken particularly historically underserved and underrepresented populations and moved them into that first level of a credential in which they end up in jobs that don't as easily stack. And so we tend to see minority women sort of channeled into early childhood education programs, and we see minority men moved into blue collar jobs that don't have an easy transition. So if we're going to do stackable transitions, we need to make sure that that stackability is clear and that we're not leaving people behind. It's got to be an equitable process.
And one thing I would add to that, I think, following on John's comment, I think is another really promising practice is when you think about building those pathways, there is the question of how to integrate basic skills instruction to help people advance. So if you've done the first tier of a pathway, oftentimes one of the things we hear is that students get caught up on the sort of basic skills levels that are needed to the reading and the math that are needed to be successful in a more advanced program. And so I think some of the models that we see, certainly a lot of people know about IBEST from Washington, but there's many different permutations of integrating basic skills instruction with workforce instruction. A lot came out from the TACT grants. We've written up on some of that, but I just think that general model and the awareness that there is additional thoughts and supports that need to happen to get people to that next rung on the ladder. And, it's some of those basic skills pieces among the advising and the other student supports that are important in helping with that transition. So it's not just to say, well, here's the pathway, but we need some supports to help people make it through the pathway.
Thank you. Thank you. I have one quick question that we got in the chat, and then we're going to let you both go on with your day. And I believe this question really related to the quality of credentials discussion. And the question was, how will this impact the community college's desire to develop digital badges or micro badges? And I know that that's a hot topic that they're all talking about. Either one of you.
I'll take a shot at it. I don't think it impacts it in the slightest. I think so long as those digital badges or micro badges accurately reflect the underlying credential or the competency, I think think it shouldn't be an impediment. I think it should just be part and parcel of the whole thing. Now, obviously, there are lots of badges out there that say lots of things, or in some cases don't seem to say much of anything.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there's a level of caveat emptor, but I think a thoughtful process for approaching it, ensuring that those badges actually align with identifiable skills and knowledge, shouldn't be an impediment in any way.
Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something very interesting about the movement to make, credentialing sort of the digital movement and to make it more transferable and portable. That's interesting. And, it's one of those areas of uncharted territory. It's like, we don't really know how it's going to evolve, but it has a lot of potential. So I agree, it's interesting. And I think the only challenge there is, is the same thing that's the broader challenge within the credentialing landscape is, how do you make that credential be known and recognized and valued and communicate what it means? So, it's the same challenge that we're dealing with everything else. But the format of the digital format is very interesting, and so the experimentation is certainly worthwhile, as long as you again think about communicating value. That's the challenge.
Right. Thank you both so much for joining us this week. I feel like you worked for us this week, and we know you have a day job. We couldn't be more pleased to have had you share your expertise with us. Thank you. Thank you both.
Well, thanks.
And I reserve the right to call on you again in a few months on other topics, because we know that your expertise expands widely. So thank you both.
Always happy to help.
To Michelle's point at the outset, you're all a lot further along than you probably recognize, and I think a lot of other states are watching you, and we certainly will be.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, that was an awesome discussion. It's always a pleasure to have real experts avail themselves to us to impart knowledge so that we can all move forward in a way that is efficient, is informed. We're excited, that's for sure, to have those two. And so we're going to move on to our next segment, the importance of industry value credentials according to industry. We, of course, want this initiative to always have the voice of industry in the forefront. And so I am going to hand the mic over, so to speak, to Glenn Bess, our Director of Manufacturing and Supply Chain Management for this Pathways Initiative. John Miller, his program manager, is working behind the scenes, texting me questions and keeping things going, but I'm going to hand it off to Glenn now. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you again, Michelle and John, for providing some very valuable insight around the importance of industry value credentials while designing pathways. You hit on some major points that I think we all will take back and process around articulating what the credential means to employers, the transparency, and it being a floor, not the ceiling. There were a number of points and additional points that both of you made that I taken note of, and I think many of our community colleges did the same, so thank you. But it segues very nicely into our next discussion with our guests, focusing on the importance of industry value credentials according to our practitioners in the industry. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gail Friedberg, co-founder and CEO of Zago Manufacturing, a woman-owned business and global producer of sustainable ceiling fasteners and components. Gail is a former corporate attorney and started Zago with her husband nearly 30 years ago at the NJIT Enterprise Development Center, small business incubator. And today they operate a manufacturer facility, solar-powered facility in Newark, New Jersey. Most recently, Gail was featured in the New Jersey Business Manufacturing Power 50 group as the 5th most powerful person in manufacturing in the Garden State for Zago's outstanding work as an essential manufacturer throughout the pandemic, when the company pivoted to manufacturing ceiling screws for pneumatic medical ventilators. Gail proudly serves on the board of trustees of New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program, and also serves as a council member for her hometown of Fairlawn Borough. Thank you for joining us today, Gail. So let me begin by asking you, as it relates to industry value credentials, what are the most applicants that your organization is looking for? What type of credentials do you typically look for in an applicant? I think you're on mute, Gail. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have to say that it's very hard for us to find credentialed applicants. A lot of what we do is get our employees trained, we get our employees into education. What would be the most relevant to us is an associate's degree in manufacturing. What would be, first level relevant to us is a certificate in CNC machining. And there are programs like this, and I want to thank you for the introduction. And I want to say that for our company, we really value community colleges and what community colleges have to offer. They're really our most trusted and valued partner. But the programs that we're looking for aren't available in a lot of the community colleges. I mean, there are community colleges that have the right programs. For example, Bergen Community College has a program which is not always offered, but in manufacturing technology. And it's a program that, basically, it was whoever designed it knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what manufacturing companies need. Our biggest need is for machinists and CNC programmers. It is so hard to find people, ready to do this work. And it's not just our company. I mean, I'm so grateful to be here to be able to make this pitch. I should have brought my pitch deck with me, but CNC programmers, machinists, that's what the manufacturers in New Jersey need. I have a colleague in a company in Somerset. They have been looking for a machinist for 2 years. We can't find machinists other than the people that are in our company now, some of whom were trained in other countries and came here with their vocational degrees. It's been impossible. We look and it's impossible to find people. And yet this is a career that is a six-figure career. So we have employees that we have been sending to school, who've gotten their certificates in CNC programming and then are, gotten their associate's degree in manufacturing technology. We have an employee who's now at NJIT. It's a pathway to a fantastic career. So that, that's kind of what I would love to push. I mean, if we could get high school kids into this CNC programming certificate, and then have them, if they came to us right out of high school, we would send them. I mean, and we do pay for, all higher education for our employees. But, if they came to us with an associate's degree in manufacturing technology, they're getting the job. So it's a pathway that is there, but it's at one community college, and I think it's a pathway that should be at all the community colleges. There's a need, and we need the community colleges to help us with that. Having it at Bergen is great, but our employees come from Newark, they come from Elizabeth, they come from Union. So we'd love to see the community colleges, that are closer to, the populations that are most in need have the programs that are most needed for New Jersey manufacturers.
You raised a point that I wanted to kind of piggyback on about not only the availability of the programs, but what would you say the impact is of, or the longevity of retaining employees when they are obtaining industry recognized credentials? Would you say that impacts the retention for your company?
Oh, absolutely. That's how you keep the best employees. There's nothing like seeing an employee come in and, with their certificate. I got my certificate. There's so much pride in that. And, by being able to help people achieve that, they're staying with us. They know that, they're gonna get their degree. and, you know, that's going to be valued at our company. You know, so it works for us. It works for the employee. You know, and it's a valued degree for them and for the industry. And, you know, the employee value is really important to us too.
Outstanding. What would you say, because it sounds like you have a defined pathway for your employees when they come into Zago. Do you feel like there's more that can be done amongst our community colleges around really elevating or making aware those pathways related to creating or obtaining a credential that leads them into an organization like Zago?
Well, I do think the work needs to be done, you know, on the pre-college level, you know, that the word has to be to get out to high school students that there's this great career path out there, you know, this really lucrative career path out there. So it has to start, you know, in the middle school, the high school level. I mean, we've done a lot of outreach to the local high schools in Newark, you know, certainly pre-pandemic, we were bringing groups in. But so that, you know, the colleges need to think about the high school level first, and bringing kids, you know, juniors and seniors from the high school into the community college to get started on this career path. And then, you know, promoting it within the community college.
Thank you. I think a lot of what, even in the earlier segment, around elevating and expanding the awareness of these, not just industry recognized credentials, but these pathways, which is really the focus of our initiative, from K through 12 all the way through the whole continuum of our community colleges and our four-year institutions. And I think that, but it's driven by your voice, Gail, the employers who are really the ones, the practitioners, and having your insights and your lived experiences, because to John's earlier point, it has to be, we have to be responsive to Zago and your peer manufacturers around how do we align these industry recognized credentials with the actual needs that you have. You mentioned CNC credential, and there was another credential that you mentioned as well. So we're obviously trying to take those thoughts, those perspectives. I know you're very involved with NJMEP, and I know they've been doing a lot in that space around trying to elevate the awareness of these pathways in manufacturing across the state, and working with many of our schools. And I know that Zago has definitely been engaged with a number of our schools. So one of the things that you mentioned, about expanding programs similar to the one that Bergen had throughout the state. And we certainly, one of the objectives of the Pathways Initiative is to basically emulate our programs and share those types of programs across the region, across the state, so that other New Jersey residents can take advantage of them as well. What would you suggest to our schools around credentials, in at least as you see it? What could we do to enhance bringing individuals into those programs to really help? Because you mentioned that one employer that's been looking for someone in
Machinist, yeah, for 2 years.
And I think I've had a conversation with them a few times. So,
I mean, what I would focus on is the practical rather than the theoretical. You know, what an associate's degree in engineering is not as valuable to us as an associate's degree that has, you know, classes in drawing and blueprint reading and tool, you know, machine tool principles. Those really practical courses are so much more important to us. You know, some programs have, you know, some theoretical classes that are very nice, but the person who takes those classes isn't going to come onto our shop floor knowing anything that's going to move them forward, really. We'll still have to do all the basic training, you know, which we're happy to do, but, you know, if you want to have something that's of value, you have to have these really practical classes. And it's not to say that this will not lead to a career in engineering. You know, it's not a, you know, it's not a dead end. It's a start that's of value. You know, so the path of going from, you know, a very practical degree in manufacturing technology, an associate's degree can lead to an engineering degree, you know, a BS in engineering. And, you know, I think that you're even more prepared for a BS in engineering if you have this, you know, practical experience behind you.
Thank you. I have a question from someone. What are your thoughts of high school offering dual degree program in the field of manufacturing technology?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, we would jump on a program like that. We would recruit at a, you know, at a high school like that. And we do recruit from the local high schools, but no, you know, any high school that had, you know, a program like that, we would be knocking on the door, you know, looking for employees. And I want to say, and I've probably taken more of my time than I should have, but we have a very young company. I mean, manufacturing is also often looked at, you know, everybody, you know, has gray hair and they're aging out. Our company is very young. We have, you know, 3 or 4 employees on the factory floor who are just right out of high school. They're fresh out of high school. Had they come out with this, you know, dual degree, they would, you know, they're great employees. They would have been much better employees and more prepared to go to the community colleges that we want to send them to, you know, for their next degrees.
Make sure. Thank you, Gail. This is one of, we really are committed to making sure that the employer's voice and insight are really incorporated into the work that our centers are doing. That's going to make us much more effective. It's going to move the needle as it relates to both expanding these programs, establishing programs where needed, to really help support the manufacturing base here in New Jersey, which is really the one of the economic drivers for the entire state. So we really appreciate you being here with us and sharing your insights, because that's extremely valuable to all of our schools represented here. And I think it will help inform the work that we do moving forward. So I thank you for taking time to be with us and share some of that insight, and welcome you to continue to be involved with our manufacturing collaborative. So thank you.
Grateful for the opportunity. It's a conversation I've wanted to have for a decade.
So timing is everything. Now is the time. Now is the time.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so I'd like to segue into our next section of our program and introduce our partnership, our Innovative Pathways Partnership. So we're pleased to have join us today Michelle Martin, Senior Research Analyst, Workforce Development Institute at Rowan College of Burlington County, and Saul Hernandez, Vicinage Chief Probation Officer of Burlington Vicinage. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us here. Thank you, Glenn, for reaching out to us. We're going to share with you today our innovative workforce offering in supply chain management. And I like that we just followed Gail, because I think it'll speak to some of the things she was mentioning about high school students. I'm Michelle Martin, and I'm part of the business engagement team with the Rowan College at Burlington County's Workforce Development Institute. And I'm here with Saul Hernandez, the Chief Probation Officer at the Burlington County Vicinage. And we're here to share his organization's goals and how this pilot program that we have meshes with their vision of training youth in our community. So today we're going to share our mutual concerns with everyone and give you an overview of the program itself, and then how this ties into the probation department's mission. Lauren, next slide. So let's start with two key problems. I know we've all faced these issues in the last 2 years, the headaches caused by, the pandemic and all the other things associated with that. So has anybody here experienced the type of supply chain delay, whether it's like furniture or maybe a new car? Yeah, okay, thanks, Catherine. So I know I have, and I think we can all relate to these two questions that are posed up here. Where are our employees, and where are the students? So we've all heard those stories of they can't unload the container ships because just don't have enough staff to do so, right, at the ports. And then we also know that enrollment at colleges has been trending downward. And in 2020, nationally at community colleges, that went down 10%. So that was huge. But yet we know that supply chain management is expected to grow 26% by next year. And that transportation alone will hire 4.6 million through 2022. And in New Jersey, the average annual wage is $72,500, and which is higher than the $65,400, which is the median in New Jersey. So in this industry, it's a bit higher. And we know to live in New Jersey, you need that. There's over 50 million people that are employed in this industry nationally. And much of this is driven by e-commerce. So what can we do to help businesses and get them skilled employees? And then as an educational institution, how can we help students find a path that provides them with the training, the skills, the certifications, an industry recognized certification that will give them a decent wage? So those are the two questions we pose to ourselves. And you can turn to the next slide. So we came up with a non-traditional solution specifically for high school students. And this we developed back in late 2019. So it's an opportunity originally. The original concept was to get those early dismissal high school seniors that got out at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, give them an opportunity to come to our campus and experience the college, have the college experience while they were taking some short-term training in an industry recognized certification program, which is our supply chain management. And then essentially what would happen is they would, have an opportunity to develop themselves into a well-paying and or available employment. So that was the idea. And there were two obstacles for us. One was funding, because high school students don't necessarily have the funding for this program. It costs a couple $1,000s, and it wasn't covered by financial aid. So that was one of our obstacles. And the other was that the pandemic hit. So how do we overcome that? Well, with the pandemic, fortunately, in January of 2020, we had already gotten our supply chain management courses online. We were just, it was something we wanted to try. And so we already had that online, but we did have to scramble to get all of our other offerings online. So that took our attention. And, we still had that funding issue. So we applied for an OMIC grant, which is Opportunity Meets Innovation Challenge Grant in the state of New Jersey, offered by the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education, OSHE. And we were awarded this money in September of 2021. So then we had the funding in place. We have our classes online. We think we can move forward with this. And so what we did, we revisited everything and we said, okay, we're going to pick 3 programs. So we maintained supply chain management because it made sense for us where we are located in this industry. And we added IT, TIA, and we added a culinary, which is an academic program that we have. So those are the 3 programs, but for the sake of, this discussion, we'll focus on supply chain. Because as we already noted, we have so many openings in Burlington County, we have many, well, through all of New Jersey, the transportation, access is so robust. So, so that we were ready to go with this. So I did want to say that, so far since we started our supply chain management program here in 2016, we have trained over 200 students, and they get the Council for Supply Chain Management Professional certification for each of the modules that they take. So we have 3 in this program that we're rolling out. It's Principles of Supply Chain Management and Transportation, and also Customer Service. And that's across the board. Any business we've spoken to, needs people who are well-versed in customer service. We have a total of 8 modules altogether, but with this, we're doing 3 of those. And we are in development of a 9th module in global supply chain. So we're teaching this live, we're teaching it online to our cohorts online, but we also are willing to go out to high schools and if they're a large enough group, do it right there at their high school. And what is really impactful, we think, is part of this grant that we wrote is that the students that will take precedence, they have to apply. So the students that will take precedence will be those who are eligible for free or reduced lunch, because we do want to give this opportunity to those who might not have that opportunity. And we've opened it up beyond the original early dismissal high school seniors to our graduates, also our juniors, upcoming seniors. And we've expanded it to our adult basic education students here at Rowan, as well as any of our community partners who also serve underserved communities. So that being said, we're really excited about this. And so we're so fortunate to meet Saul Hernandez at a community event, and we discussed this opportunity. So I will hand it over to Saul right now so he can explain to you what his organization does for the youth in our community.
Thank you, Michelle, and I appreciate you bringing me on and representing the Burlington Business Probation Division, along with the New Jersey Judiciary. And for those of you who don't know, probation is part of the court system. It's part of the judiciary, 3rd branch of government. Some people don't realize that when I say I work with probation. So, we talked, Michelle and I, as you mentioned, a community event, and I was very excited to hear of this opportunity, the high school's Quick Step program. And it falls in line with what we're trying to do with our youth in probation, and identifying those youth that may benefit from a program such as this program, the High School Quick Step. Just to give some background here on what we're doing in probation altogether. It's called Enhanced Outcome-Based Supervision. So basically, probation is using a risk needs responsivity model, moving from a risk-based supervision and using a risk assessment to develop case plans. And when we develop these case plans catered to each youth, it's not cookie cutter. Sometimes educational opportunities, especially where a youth in probation has the aptitude for going beyond high school, and some of them do. We try to develop those case plans and identify those opportunities. And this is exactly one of those opportunities. So when reviewing probation's existing role statement, although producing positive outcomes was mentioned, the focus was heavy on monitoring, enforcing, and supervising, as opposed to an emphasis on long-term behavior change, which in turn leads to desistance from crime or less recidivism. and safer community. So using evidence-based practices, we are focusing on criminogenic needs, which includes employment and in part, education. Now, with regard to the judiciary opportunities for building success, jobs, it's critically important that our clients, both adult and in juvenile, have the opportunity to get jobs. That's a key component of basic life, right? So there are many jobs that are available that, you know, employers, as mentioned earlier, are finding hard to fill. So we're focusing in on that. And Chief Justice Stuart Radner has put an initiative together in the judiciary called Jobs. And part of the focus is to have our youth that we identify get the benefit of getting educated or trained and eventually getting that job placement based on that education and training. We found that many of our youth who want to go to college don't because of the daunting prospect of college application and funding. Further, many lack access to a positive and motivating support system. Sometimes, believe it or not, probation is that sole entity providing that support. So many feel college is an unattainable goal in our probation program, and introducing them to a level of college life, such as this high school quick step program, will alleviate some of these barriers. And again, we would work with RCBC and Michelle's group to identify youth that would benefit from this program. Not all will, but we do have a few that could very well benefit from the program. So that's the outline of what we're looking at and how our mission in probation and the judiciary will help our clients in partnering with RCBC. And I'm very excited to have this partnership.
We are as well.
Thank you, Michelle. And so that program sounds phenomenal. I love the fact that you saw that you all are taking a very proactive approach in engaging and redirecting youth into some positive career paths, which can lead to, because we have to do that to have a sustainable workforce. We need to find a way to engage our youth, and there are youth that still have opportunity to take advantage of this. So thank you both for your time and your presentation. I wanted to quickly just share with everyone that a critical component of this work of our centers is our quarterly industry leadership team meetings. We kicked off our first leadership team meeting for each of our sectors on last week. And I'm pleased to say that we had a very robust discussion at our industry leadership team meeting. You'll see a number of our employers who were there, participated, and provided tremendous insight around industry trends, things that are impacting their sector, and we're using that information. Each quarter, we'll be giving a readout of those meetings to share with everyone to help in the work that we continue to do. A few points that came out of next slide, Lauren. A few items that came out of that discussion. I'll just touch on real briefly for the essence of time around some of the trends that they identified were new and emerging subsectors, shifting consumer expectations. I think Michelle kind of alluded to that in the supply chain breakdown. Complex supply chains, some of the challenges they identified were misconception about the industry, an aging regional infrastructure, although Zago has kind of changed the model. I mean, they have a more youthful workforce, but many of the other manufacturers, I hear the other side where they have an aging workforce. Another challenge that was indicated was inconsistency as it related to global relations. And of course, we're all seeing that across the country in many aspects. But some of the opportunities that they identified included strategic location. New Jersey is always, it has been a strategic location on the northeast corridor of the country. You can see some of that here. Strategic partnerships. We have an opportunity, and we have a number of strategic partnerships both within our schools, our institutions, and with the private sector, such as the NJBIA and others. Skills credentials, some of this was touched on earlier, but one of the things that the leadership team talked about was the need for increased mathematics and computer proficiencies and analytics having an impact on both manufacturing and supply chain. Essential skills. I think someone mentioned the basic skill. I think it was John that mentioned basic skills early on. And then one of the last things that they were mentioned were diversity, equity, and inclusion for our sectors. So these were some of the things that the leadership team identified and discussed on last week. This conversation will continue. We're excited to have such a robust group of business leaders who have taken their time, such as Gail has today, to be with us. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Catherine for some other information, and then we will be close to concluding the program.
We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We couldn't be more honored to have had all the speakers participate today that we have. We hope that we have provided the information that all of us need to further this work along. We have scheduled our future meetings, our April meetings for the collaboratives. And instead of taking up your whole week, which is what we know we've done for some of you who've attended all 4 of our collaborative meetings, we are now moving to a model where there will be one collaborative meeting a week on Wednesdays. And so the first one coming up will be this one. So here's your notice. We will be sending out our email blast invitations, but Wednesday, April 6th at 10 o'clock will be the next collaborative meeting for the manufacturing and supply chain management collaborative, and certainly all the others are listed below. If you are not signed up to receive our invitations as well as updates and other materials, please use this QR code to access the sign up page on our Pathways website. And Glenn, do you have any other closing remarks?
I would just like to really personally thank our speakers today, John, Michelle, Gail, Saul, everyone, and Michelle, 2 Michelles, for being here, and for all of the folks who are here with us to collaborate, exchange information. I've been getting some communication from some of our folks about this, and they want to connect with us later. So we will be following up. Encourage you to share this information with your colleagues and your peers for our next meeting, which will be in a couple of weeks, but it will be spaced out. Our next meeting is close, but the following month it'll be a month apart, so it won't be every week like that. So, but thank you again, and thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, and you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.